This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? I'm your host, Lou Sitzer, and producer of this series. This is a compilation. This is the 9th program dealing with the issue of Centennial Dam. And the idea behind the program in general is to look at local issues that have greater than local impact. The Centennial Dam is being looked at for a number of reasons: water scarcity, climate change. It's an issue that is going to require great scrutiny and discussion and education. So we have a panel here that have hosted the previous episodes, and Trina has been a guest as a science reporter. So let me first say that the 9 episodes will have included 3 Native American indigenous tribal leaders, 4 representatives from the South Ute River Citizens League, 2 board members from Nevada Irrigation District, 1 general manager from Nevada Irrigation District, and 2 independent specialists. So we've tried to really take a deep dive into the information and controversy of the dam. If you want to look at any of these programs, you can go to YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here, NCTV. Also, these programs air Monday nights, 7 p.m., Comcast Channel 17. Once a week, they are periodically aired. You can also go to nevadacountytv.org and find the programs archived. So I'd like to welcome our panelists, Trina Kleist, who has been city editor of the Union and has previously explained climate change and how it will affect the Sierra Nevadas. She has a long past in terms of science reporting and being a journalist in Mexico for Associated Press. Eric Thome, who has hosted many radio and TV shows on public affairs and has been a long-term resident of the area, as has Al Dover, who is a retired Superior Court judge and mediator. So welcome to all.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you.
And I do want to have Al explain the process by which we, and hopefully you, will be looking at the issue of Centennial Dam.
Thank you, Lou. Sometimes I know when people are faced with difficult decisions, especially decisions maybe related to something as controversial as the Centennial Dam, it's nice for them to have some idea possibly of, how do I process such complexity? So I oftentimes think of it as kind of like listening as a judge. And so here's what I mean by that. First of all, in a dispassionate way, where you actually can sit back and be patient with yourself, because people often feel that, well, this is important. I need to make a decision. I need to be on one side or the other. And so judges don't listen to agree with either side. They listen to understand all sides. So really, I think to be patient with oneself, as you noted, Lou, in some of your interviews, you said, well, this feels like a crisis, like a tipping point. And it's difficult for people to make decisions when they actually feel they're in crisis. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to be patient with yourself if you feel to be in crisis. So I suggest one take a deep breath, sit back, and wait till you're confident that you have the information you need. Another thing I think that's important for people trying to make difficult decisions is that they're self-aware. And by that I mean they know if they have preconceived biases or interests or concerns about an issue. They know it and they acknowledge it. They say, yeah, this is how I feel about it. And then thirdly, to really, especially when one feels they're in a disagreement with someone or not sure where they want to go, is to be clear that you don't listen to someone you disagree with to agree. You listen only to understand. Oh, I completely disagree, but I get it. I know what you're saying. I appreciate your point of view. I respect what you have to say, even though I may fundamentally disagree with you about it. So I think those things are really important. And fundamentally, where I see people really suffer with this, in other words, the impediments to doing those things, are really twofold. One's really psychological. It's a condition that is referred to as confirmation bias. And in English, it just means this. If I bring you a message that agrees with your previously held views, opinions, or beliefs, you'll agree with me. Easy. But if I bring you a view that is in contravention to your previously held views, opinions, or beliefs, then many people will just denigrate it, disregard it, completely ignore it, and somehow or sometimes disparage the bringer of the message, but all to one's detriment, because what it really means is you're not going to understand the message. You're not going to fully appreciate what's coming your way. And then the other condition is actually physiological. It's a built-in problem. It's a welcome to the human condition problem, which is this. If I have very strong feelings about something, like the Centennial Dam, one way or the other, very strong feelings, then if I were to slide one into an MRI machine, ask you questions about it, you'd see every part of your brain would light up except what? Reason. That little frontal lobe is completely not engaged because your feelings are what's driving your decision making. And when one is faced with a very complex problem, one needs that frontal lobe to be engaged so that you can actually do the work of understanding a complex problem. So that's pretty much what I mean. And then once you've managed those problems, and by the way you manage those problems, of strong feelings especially, or confirmation bias, one, recognize that they exist, and then two, have a goal. Have a goal in mind. And your goal in matters like this should be not to come to a conclusion, but to understand. So if my goal is to understand someone with whom I disagree, and I see my feelings are cutting off my listening, I'll notice. Because my goal is to understand them. So then I'll keep listening. So that's really what I think is, the message I have for trying to manage a difficult decision. Because once you've done that, then you can know, I have to really drill down here. This is where I don't understand. Or this is where I either don't trust the message or the messenger. So I'm going to look deeper here. And then you do that, and with the information that I think you have provided through these shows, Lou, as the producer, thank you so much for doing it, for this great education. It enables people to do just that. You've got the information there.
Well, let me add one more thing, and that is that this is a very challenging issue. It's complex. It is not a slam dunk. It's something that the viewers and each of us need to maintain an open mind about, because I know that I have moved considerably from one interview to the next in trying to understand points of view and not be swayed too much by them, essentially to try to understand what is basic. So, Trina, if you would please set the stage for us by reviewing briefly the basics of how climate is sort of pushing this issue of the dam.
Certainly, Lou. I want to go over two kind of general areas. The first one is the reality of climate change and how it's affecting snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. And the second thing I want to touch on is the natural variation of California's climate within that context of climate change. So first of all, we've already seen an increase of temperature, of wintertime low temperatures, which are crucial to forming snowpack in the first place, of 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a documented increase over the last 123 years. Okay. Secondly, scientists are projecting a further increase of as much as 7 degrees of springtime temperatures, which is a little bit different, a little bit warmer, but springtime temperatures in the Sierra Nevada through the end of this century, or in the next, say, 80 years, okay? So, and that is if greenhouse gas emissions continue at their current rate, okay? Even if greenhouse gas emissions are reduced according to what has been set out in the Paris Climate Accord of 2015, which the United States has pulled out of, even if we were to achieve those standards, we would still see an increase in springtime temperatures in the Sierra Nevada of 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're still going to see an increase in temperature if we do everything we can possible to reduce greenhouse gases, but not as much. Okay, so the effects of that are a decrease of snowpack to about 1/3 of the current level. Okay, the level that we've seen in the last 40 years. Okay, so 1/3 of what our normal has been is what the new normal will be. The third thing that is projected to be seen is that runoff is going to be coming earlier in the season than it has been historically. We already see that happening. Local water managers have already observed that. That has an impact for how water is stored. So if temperature goes up and snowpack goes down, the whole system of water storage currently depends on the snowpack being in the Sierra Nevada through the winter up until mid-spring, say the middle of April or early May, and then melting and coming down into the reservoirs, melting usually slowly, not always, but usually slowly, filling the reservoirs, and then water coming out of the reservoirs largely for agricultural use in our case in western Nevada County. So in addition, these changes are happening to a greater degree at elevations below 8,000 feet, which is precisely where our local snowpack is formed. And in fact, snowpack across California is the source for about 60% of water in the state. So this is affecting our local water. It's also affecting water on a statewide level. Okay. Now, natural variation within that overall trend. So we have the overall trend. Rising temperatures mean that precipitation comes as rain instead of snow. Snowpack doesn't form as much. Now, within that overall trend, we have the natural variation in California's climate. California has the most variable climate in the entire continental U.S., according to the National Weather Service. Okay, so that means that we have a couple of dry years, we have a couple of wet years, we have a warm year, and we have a colder year. And these years tend to come in little clumps, so we'll see a period of a little bit warmer, and then it gets a little bit cooler. We see periods where there is a little bit more precipitation, a little bit less precipitation. Drought in some form or another comes as a natural part of this cycle approximately every 7 years, a mild or minor drought. More serious droughts come about every 15 to 20 years. Okay, a severe drought comes with less frequency, but during our recent drought, the 2012 to 2015 drought, that was considered a 1,000-year drought. But that's expected to come more often because of that trend of higher temperature, snowpack turning to rain, snowfall turning to rain, and overall less snowpack. So we have these kind of long-term trends, but then we have natural variation of climate and precipitation within that overall trend. So that's the background for not only Centennial Dam discussion, but discussion about what are we doing in many, many areas in our economy and in our society.
Right. That's the background to the discussion of why would a dam be needed, because of the need for additional storage due to water scarcity, lack of snowpack, possible flooding. All these issues come up now, and the Centennial Dam is one proposal to try to remedy or deal with climate change.
And the argument at Nevada Irrigation District is that for 90 years we've had our water stored in snowpack.
Right.
And that Centennial Dam would help offset the loss of snowpack storage.
Right.
Just to
so
clarify.
Given that, we now have the stage set for having watched 4 hours of shows on the Centennial Dam issue. What have we learned from observing them? What have been our takeaways? So Eric, why don't you start us off?
Okay. I think for the last 4 decades I've lived in Nevada County, I've tended to look on the Nevada Irrigation District as sort of the North Korea of California, the most secretive place around. It doesn't have any atomic bombs, but it almost could, because you don't know what they're doing. Their meetings have always been at inconvenient times. They've never been televised. They don't give out very good information in general.
That is now beginning to change.
And that is beginning to change, partly, I think, as a result of these programs. And so when they first announced the Centennial Dam, I shouldn't say announced, but when it first really began to get a lot of publicity 5 months ago or so, the arguments they put forth, mostly in op-eds in the Union, seemed very weak to me. And I knew it came out very quickly that they first proposed this dam in the 1920s. They even bought the land for the dam site back then. They had suggested at various times doing it. They considered turning it over to the Army Corps of Engineers in the 40s. They'd considered doing it in the 50s, but found they wouldn't have enough revenue. So it seemed like they had a fixed desire back there, almost like trying to build an atomic bomb, that they just had to do whatever happened. And then the responses that came from a lot of private citizens, but especially from groups like Circle, South Yuba River Citizens League, seemed devastating. It just made it seem like a folly. And when I first participated in the first programs in this series, I interviewed several people from Circle, and I found their arguments very convincing. Also interviewed a private citizen, Otis Wolin, who lives in Placer County, but right on where the reservoir would go. He had some very well substantiated papers he had written showing that the NID proposals really made no sense and would be very damaging to recreation, to traffic patterns, and
native
especially
sites.
to where he lived.
Yeah.
And it was only in the last week that I began to see the arguments, first from Nick Wilcox, who's been a NID director for, I think, 8 or 10 years, and then from Rem Sitzer, who's the current general manager, and they completely turned this around. And they didn't convince me, but they showed me that NID really had some very good arguments on its side, and that some of what in particular Otis Wolin had suggested, he said that when NID claimed that the dam was necessary because otherwise we'd be inundated with water, that was picking a certain series of years that were actually the wettest, and he said that would not actually be the case, but it turned out that he picked a series of years that were the driest in this pattern. So I began to see that it's a much, much more complex question. NID has not convinced me, and I think there are some other alternatives. But as a result of these programs that you put forward, I've switched my point of view probably 75 or 80%.
That's great.
How interesting. Well, I think for me, Lou, some of the takeaways, if you will be to notice kind of following up on both Trina and Eric, you know, there's actually some agreement. Nobody said there isn't climate change on either side of the equation. Everybody said, yes, there is climate change. And yes, we have to do something about climate change. Okay, so there you go. There's some commonality. And then the question is, okay, what? And, you know, and that's really what's, I think, so interesting and difficult about this particular issue. When I heard Eric's interview and I heard many of the Circle people talk about 21st century solutions and tech solutions, well, you know, I never really got to what do they actually do? I mean, I heard those terms, meadow restoration and forest management and conserve and purple pipe, but I really couldn't tell you right now how that can manage a lack of snowpack or how it can manage storage and delivery when needed. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And I still don't know about that. And then on the NID side of the equation, I heard something that I thought was also quite interesting, which was, this isn't even a project yet. It's a proposal. And, you know, I never got that impression from those early on articles. I thought, we're done. We own the land. We're moving, you know. And so now I'm hearing, no. And then the other area, I think, of agreement that I found interesting was, well, we need to discuss. You know, everybody says we do need to listen to each other. Okay, I've explained why that's difficult, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it's critical that it is done. So those were kind of my takeaways, with the last one being there still isn't this, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, a raw water management plan. And this is a 50-year out plan, 50. Nor is there an EIR completed. Well, I don't know how anybody really could have an opinion for or against that's like me.
Trying to keep an open mind.
Without having reviewed that information. Because this isn't just about me. This isn't just about you know, our local area. This is about a lot of different interests, be it urban, ag, you know, what have you. And so for me, this was, I've got a lot of listening to do, and then a lot of drilling down to do, both on the messages, like Eric pointed out, and the messengers, and what are their bias, interests, or motives. So there's a lot of complexity there. I'm certainly not ready to make a call on it. I also just want to say I really did appreciate the Nisanen voice here, because I hadn't really heard it before. I think we absolutely have to honor that. I thought it was very interesting, and it reminded me of one other quick thing. I was with Gary Snyder once, and I said, Gary, how do they name these places like Pine Creek Park? He said, well, that's simple. Whatever they had to destroy to make it, that's what they call it. And I thought, well, you know, sometimes these things happen because we have to balance so many interests, but it doesn't mean that we can't find a way to try to preserve as much of that heritage as possible, that we can't find a way to honor it. You know, even if, like in some places, they've done it with a, you know, save everything you can and erect monuments where you can, or museums where you can educate people about what's been lost. Here's what we could save, but here's what's forever lost. So I really appreciate that they have a voice. And any way this thing comes out, they should have a voice.
That's great. Yeah, and listening to that interview of the Nisenan tribal leaders, they are willing to very much dialogue with NID, with Circle, and so that their point of view is considered. They're not obstructionist that I could sense. All right, Trina, you want to weigh in here?
I would love to. And in fact, it was one of the Nisenan leaders, Shelley Covert, who said something that I think is really the nut of everything, and that was, let's enter into these conversations with wisdom. And in order to have wisdom, we need to listen, and that's what you're bringing in, Judge. But if we're going to listen, we have to listen without biases. So can we listen even if we seem to be convinced of a particular viewpoint, you know? And I think what you've brought up is when we have information that's brought forward from a credible source and presented clearly, we're able to listen in a new way that gets through our biases and our emotional barriers that you brought up. And that's going to be so important moving forward. And so I think that, and as a writer and as an editor of writers, I want to point out that a written argument isn't necessarily clearly delineated. Okay, so just someone can put an opinion piece into the newspaper or some other outlet, but that doesn't mean that the reasons are clearly set forward. Okay, so as conveyors of information and conveyors of opinion even, we humans often lack the ability to express ourselves clearly. Mm-hmm. So that makes listening even more important, and digging into the facts very, very important. Another thing that came out in the interviews that I thought was very, I think, worth looking into more, again, to underscore what you said, Judge, the management techniques of the 21st century. What are those? What do they look like? How much of those are already in action? Okay, because Nevada Irrigation District has implemented a number of things for conservation, for monitoring of water flow, for education of the population, for improved technology within its system. It would be very useful for all of us to know how much water is that actually able to conserve for us. How much could we actually stockpile for this? An idea has moved forward with the mercury removal and the dredging. How much more could that be expanded? How many acre feet could that restore to our reservoirs? So I think a lot of information is still to come out there to know what would the offset of that be. Another thing that came out that I think is very, very important is the idea of water rights. Nancy Weber talked about that in her presentation. Water rights in the state of California is extremely complicated. A lot of it depends on what could happen in the legislature. I think we have to remember that while we see our situation in a very local way, people who enjoy our natural benefits and resources, people who cherish the cultural heritage that could be endangered by this dam. This exists in a context of other users of Sierra Nevada snowpack water that have a very different agenda and are maybe as interested in how we resolve things at the local level and have the votes in the legislature, the state legislature, to prosecute their agenda.
So you're talking about the politics of water rights, which
exactly
would probably take another show for us to really
or
delve
series,
into.
in fact, yeah.
And
I
don't want to cut you short.
No. I just want to add one thing. Something that Nancy said was that anything can happen at the state level. Yeah. So that's something I think for all of us to be aware of as we listen and try to wisely.
There is a bit of a threat that looms there, and it's kind of a question mark. It's an unknown. I'm not sure anyone can predict or understand how it will work, but it's there. There was something that really struck me as being unusual, and again, it's whether or not we can institute present 21st century thinking, and it was Steve Baker, a hydrogeologist, who was saying that the snowpack melts, goes into the reservoirs send the water out to the farmers and the residents, and pretty soon it gets used up, and when it does, what do people do, particularly the farmers, is they take water out of the ground. They pump out the wells in the valley and elsewhere. And what he said was, it just raised a question I thought that was really worthwhile pursuing, and that is if we could find a way to recharge the groundwater. In other words, as the water comes off of the mountains and goes into the reservoirs and overflows during those peak times of water abundance, are there ways in which the water can be put back into the ground so that the wells could recharge, the wells could replenish, and that water then becomes available again to farmers and the public? It was an idea that hadn't been raised. And one of the discussions I've had is new technology is going to be addressing these issues. And a dam is an old technology. Yeah.
I want to say I did raise that question to Otis Wolin, and you might not have caught it because he dismissed it just like that.
Yeah.
I said, won't some of this water that rains on the ground, won't it be recharge the groundwater? He said, oh no. And I don't know if he has any particular grounds for saying that. It certainly suited his argument.
Look what the Romans did with water. I mean, they were miracle workers. They had cisterns. They put water under the ground. They created reservoirs of their own, aqueducts. And so there are ways to address the water needs of the future that we haven't really contemplated or pursued. And yeah.
I wanted to add a couple things to that line of discussion. One of them is that groundwater recharge is something that is being pursued very, very earnestly at a statewide level, and it's something that can really benefit water users especially in the Central Valley, and that's where most of the research is going into. Water recharge does not benefit Western Nevada County to a large extent. There's relatively little groundwater possibilities in our area. But along those lines, some of the possibilities do lie up in the headwaters. So meadow restoration, which is something that Nancy Weber brought up, Nevada Irrigation District is studying the possibility of restoring English Meadow, and that would put more water into Jackson Meadows Reservoir. Other organizations in our area are doing stream and meadow restoration along other waterways. All of these raise the possibility of water storage in higher elevation streams that would then put water into the streams during the summer months when reservoirs are already starting to be drawn down. That would be a new source of water. But it's unclear at this point how much that restoration would put back into our reservoirs. And these restoration projects are very, very expensive, as are the fire fuels reduction projects, which is another way of preserving groundwater in our upper elevations to then provide water into our streams that would come down into our waterways.
As is the mercury removal.
Yes.
That's also expensive.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Now, one person to somewhat contradict this, I can't remember if it was Steve Baker or Rem Scherzinger, said that there are now restrictions on groundwater use in the valley, that when the wells get drawn down too much, then the state requires the foothill reservoirs to let out more water, which doesn't help us.
Exactly.
But it helps the situation in the valley, but could make it worse for us.
Yeah.
And I think to tag along on that one, we're not just talking about, to the extent, we're talking about water rights. NID has water obligations.
Yes.
And now you're talking about some obligations that people really have to understand to appreciate the context that this decision has to be made on by the Nevada Irrigation District and its constituents, to wit, us. Because we then have, we can't say, never mind those legal obligations that you have, NID board. Guess what? We've been trumped by the law on that. Yeah. And the law says, just in terms of the fish or in terms of, what's going on downstream, certain needs. I think someone alluded in one of the episodes that maybe NID didn't get this recent funding for the Centennial Dam from the state. Why not? Because they didn't address the Delta. They were just looking at what we needed here at home. And so they feel maybe they were punished because they didn't address stream needs and their obligations, maybe that somebody at the state level sees also. So that I thought was interesting. Nick Wilcox's presentation in terms of, well, guess what? You know what? There's actually an order where you don't get your water.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make this up. Mm-hmm. We've got our, out of district, you go first. You know who that is?
Yeah.
How about the city of Grass Valley and
That's
the
right.
city of Nevada City?
That's right.
How about we start with you not getting water? And then how about it was like the non-ag raw water? And he said, my district includes Lake Wildwood. Sorry, no golf course, no lake. Mm-hmm. Next, then
That's
the
right.
ag, and it was what? It was like the annuals go, then the perennials, then the livestock, and finally we get to the urban users. So I think people have to appreciate that they have obligations.
Restrictions,
That's right.
guidance.
That's right.
Yeah.
And to add to those obligations are environmental obligations.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some quite large percentage of NID water that goes to environmental obligations, so that there's enough stream flow for fish, so that there's enough going in for riparian use. So stream water soaks into the banks, and there's this whole riparian ecosystem that is nourished by that water.
Right,
It's not
right.
just the fish in the stream, although that's a
Right.
big part of it. The delta is of primary importance at the state level, so public benefit means not benefit to the public of Western Nevada County,
Right.
but benefit to the delta and that ecosystem. So that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, me too.
One thing that Steve Baker brought up was he kept referring to principled compromises because he felt that each stakeholder in this situation had certain things it had to stand for, and these were essentially the principles for that organization. And he gave one rather grim example of maybe having to cut back on environmental obligations by, instead of maintaining a wide riparian habitat, in bad years you'd make it a very narrow one, and then know that in future years you might be able to widen it again. But this is just another example that the way it looks right now, especially if our population goes up to 60 million, we're not all going to get what we want.
Right.
But if
Along
you try
those-
sometime, you just might find.
You get what you need.
And now along those lines of the population growth in 60 million, another thing that is totally out of our local control is what's going on in Southern California. Okay, so there's this movement to declare water a human right, a movement to look at how
Secure the water.
the state can
Right.
pull back on these old water rights that were granted more than 100 years ago. What no one is talking about that I've heard is what's going on with the growth in Southern California that's going to fuel future demand on Sierra Nevada water. No one's saying to developers in the Inland Empire, you can't build more of those subdivisions. You can't authorize those greenhouses for marijuana cultivation. You can't build these new condos in dry areas where there isn't currently a secure water supply. So that comes through in the EIR process, is my understanding for that. But when you have local agencies giving the green light to local development, then there's a whole nother set of imperatives going on in these local bodies to decide how many more people are we going to add to the demand for California water. And that's entirely beyond what we're able to control here in Nevada County.
We could say sensibly, well, you don't get to build more houses down there
Right.
until you come up with your own water.
And that would make sense to us.
But they've already come up with more votes
And they've
in the
already
legislature.
And they've already come up with the source of the water. And one source of the water is, according to their some water plans that are being proposed by Southern California water agencies, is their source of the water is to take it away from Central Valley agriculture. So they're not coming up with new sources. They're just saying, well, we'll get somebody else's water reallocated to our growth and development.
Well, when you look at the fact that California is now the 5th largest economy in the world, and a lot of that is farming, what is produced, so it's going to be very contentious between Southern California population, the farming industries, and the scarcity of water and how it's going to flow. So this is not the end of the story. This is not a conclusion to the program, but we do need to at least stop this one or draw this one episode to a close. There are a couple of things that really need to be mentioned strongly, and that is the Raw Water Master Plan and the EIR, both of which are due out sometime end of summer, fall, and which will require scrutiny in detail and lots of questioning. The other thing I want to mention is that NID, Nevada Irrigation District, is becoming more and more open and willing to entertain forums, discussions, proposals to expand the exchange so that it's more open, less one-sided, less proposing a dam as a solution, more willing to accept the consequences of not building a dam. So this is what's come up lately in the most recent interviews that we've had. And so what I would suggest is that everyone do their homework, keep reading, keep talking, keep watching, and we will return to this. And the panel has been great. Been lively discussion. Bring anything else people want to recommend. We have a little bit of time. If you want to suggest where do we go from here, if I haven't covered it all.
I'll just mention that you had said, I think, that one of you, I think it was you were a little disappointed that Steve Baker hadn't made more positive suggestions, because he was the hydrogeologist, and he had said that he's working on an organization called Operation Unite, which is trying to bring all the stakeholders together to do just what you're talking about, to talk about these things and come up with the principled compromises that might be necessary. I don't know how far along he is with that project, but if he does get it going, it's something that we should all participate in as much as we can.
I would like to recommend a blog that I have referred to a lot to educate myself about this topic. It's called Water Deeply. It can be found online, and it has news from all over the state of California, all over the West, and I think it would do people a lot of good to understand these larger contexts that our local situation is within.
Do you know if it's a nonpartisan kind of effort? Have you sensed its sort of journalistic quality?
I sense that there's a lot of science behind it.
Okay.
I don't want to vouch for every single thing that's written in every single article. I think that is one source, and every source has to be taken with not with a grain of salt, but with the understanding that everybody comes to this from a certain perspective or a certain background. So, Water Deeply.
Water Deeply. I'll check it out, because I think that part of this, as I might have said earlier, is not trying to make a decision in a moment of crisis, but in a moment of deep reflection and understanding. And I like that there is agreement, for example, that climate change exists, maybe not in Washington, D.C., but everywhere here in California, certainly, and the groups we spoke with. And so in terms of, okay, so now what? Well, transparency now. Transparency, I think, is what's really going to be critical for all these different groups, to say, who are you? What are your biases, interests, and motives and concerns? And so, most people aren't going to understand reading an EIR, honestly, no matter how well educated, or maybe a raw water master plan. So someone like myself, I need help with that. So I'd like to be able to go to scientific sources, independent experts, know they're independent, or if they're not, know they're not, so that at some point I can really decide where I want to go from here in terms of support or opposition of a dam or of other types of options.
Great.
And one point, just to reinforce what you said, that you emphasized at the beginning that we had thought this was a project that was on its way, but it's really just a proposal. And the raw water master plan, the EIR, and so on, are still a good ways down the pike. So I would say that this is a time to follow your maxim that we're in no rush. This is not a crisis. It's a decision that might take 10, 15 years to make. And
it can affect us for the next 50 or 100.
right.
Yes, yes.
And so this is not something you just kind of rush into. This is not just us. This is not just folks down the hill. This is our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Which is why we need to listen with wisdom.
Exactly.
And we gain wisdom by educating ourselves as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. So thanks again, Lou, for producing this program.
Well, if you like what you've heard, if you've liked what you've seen, if you've learned something in the process, great. Continue to support the show. Where do we go from here? If you go to nevadacountytv.org, you can donate. This is publicly sponsored and underwritten, so we appreciate your support. And you can also find it on YouTube. Where do we go from here? NCTV. And so thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of a lively discussion. I'm sure we'll be back. Thanks again.